I'll only spend $500, I said. By sunrise, I owed $45,000 in debt. My name is Oliver. I'm a construction foreman with steady hands and 3 kids who used to run to the door when I came home. I kept receipts in shoeboxes and counted grocery money twice. That Friday night, I had overtime pay burning in my pocket and a quiet house that felt too small. The casino was supposed to be steam relief. 2 hours, $500, then home to my sleeping family. I meant it like I meant the sun would rise. But wins made me hungry. Losses made me desperate. The ATM became my friend. Hours blurred into lies. The emergency fund vanished. Christmas money disappeared. My wife started asking questions I couldn't answer without digging deeper holes. I thought I was chasing one bad night. I was actually burying 6 months of trust, one chip at a time. When a man who plans everything stops planning his exit, what breaks first? His bank account or his family's faith in who he really is? The dust was still in my hair when I clocked out Friday at 6. 2 weeks of 14-hour days building out the Riverside Shopping Center, and my crew was finally done. We'd beaten the deadline by 3 days, which meant Christmas bonuses all around and maybe some actual sleep. "Bradford, you look like you crawled through drywall," Jimmy said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Go home to that pretty wife before she forgets what you look like." I laughed and shook the white powder from my shirt. At 34, I'd been swinging hammers for 12 years, managing crews for the last 5. The work was hard but steady. Good money, decent benefits, and I'd built a reputation for bringing jobs in on time. People trusted me with their projects, their budgets. The drive home took me past the Riverside Casino's neon sign for the first time I really noticed it. Funny how you can pass something every day and never actually see it. The letters spelled out "Winners" in flashing red and gold, with smaller text promising Vegas-style gaming and 24-hour action. The parking lot looked busy for a Friday evening that I pulled into our driveway thinking about the overtime pay in my wallet. $840, all crisp 20s. More cash than we'd seen in one place since our tax refund. Sarah was packing up her book club materials when I walked in. "You look exhausted," she said, kissing my cheek. "And you smell like construction." 2 weeks of it. I set my keys on the counter next to the emergency fund envelope. "How was your day?" "Good. Jenny's picking me up in 20 minutes. We're discussing that new mystery novel, the one about the detective with gambling problems." She paused. Ironically, I watched her gather her things. Sarah had been going to book club for 3 years, same group of women, same Thursday routine. I liked that she had something that was just hers. "Kids asleep?" Finally, Tommy fought bedtime for an hour, but he's out now. The house settled into that particular quiet that comes when children stop moving. Sarah's car pulled away, and suddenly the silence felt heavy. I stood in our kitchen, still in my work clothes, looking at the emergency fund envelope we'd been feeding for 8 months. $3,200. Every extra 20, every skipped restaurant meal, every generic brand purchase. It represented discipline, planning, the kind of financial responsibility my father never had. The kind of man I'd promised myself I'd be. I counted the overtime money again. $840. The biggest single windfall we'd had all year. The casino billboard flashed in my memory. Vegas-style gaming, 20 minutes away. I told myself I deserved this. 2 weeks of brutal work, crew breathing down my neck, deadlines that seemed impossible until we made them happen. Sarah would be gone for hours. The kids were asleep until morning. $500 seemed reasonable. More than we'd ever spent on entertainment, but not enough to hurt us if I lost it all. Which I wouldn't, because I'd set a limit and stick to it. That's what responsible people do. I showered off the construction dust and put on clean jeans and the blue shirt Sarah bought me for our anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I felt like someone preparing for something important. The emergency fund envelope sat on the counter where I'd left it. $500 felt heavy in my wallet as I drove toward Riverside Casino. The radio played classic rock, and I found myself singing along to songs I hadn't heard in years. When was the last time I'd done something just for me? Just for fun? I thought about our budget, the way Sarah and I tracked every expense in a composition notebook she kept by the phone. Mortgage, $1,200. Car payments, $640 total. Groceries, $350 if we were careful. Utilities, insurance, daycare for Tommy. It all added up to a life lived paycheck to paycheck despite my decent income. But tonight felt different. The overtime money was extra, a bonus on top of our regular planning. And $500 wouldn't kill us. We'd spent more than that on car repairs last month. The casino parking lot was fuller than I'd expected. Pickup trucks like mine mixed with sedans and a few fancy cars near the entrance. People dressed in everything from work clothes to date night outfits walked toward the glowing entrance that I sat in my truck for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. This wasn't something I did. Sarah and I were the responsible couple, the ones who brought casseroles to neighbors and never missed a bill payment. We didn't gamble, but I also wasn't hurting anyone. $500, a few hours. Then home to my sleeping family, I took exactly $500 from my wallet, 5 crisp hundreds from the overtime pay, and left my credit cards in the glove compartment. That was the rule I made. Only spend what I brought, no exceptions. The casino doors whooshed open with a rush of climate-controlled air that smelled like cigarettes and cleaning solution. The sound hit me first, electronic beeping, the distant ringing of slot machines. Conversation and laughter mixing into white noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The carpet was burgundy with gold swirls, worn thin in pathways between gaming areas. Overhead, the lighting was warm and timeless. No windows, no clocks, nothing to remind you what time it was or how long you'd been there. I walked toward the cashier's cage, passing rows of slot machines where people sat in comfortable chairs, pressing buttons with the focused attention of people at work. Some looked bored. Others looked completely absorbed. The woman at the cage had silver hair and kind eyes. "First time?" she asked, smiling. "That obvious. You're looking around like you're trying to memorize the place. Most people just want their chips." I exchanged $200 for chips, keeping the other $300 as my safety net. The chips felt substantial in my hands. White and red plastic discs that somehow seemed more valuable than the paper money they'd replaced. "Blackjack tables are that way," she said, pointing toward an area with green felt tables. "Good luck." I chose a $15 table with a friendly-looking dealer and 4 other players. The dealer's name tag read Janet, and she had the quick, efficient movements of someone who'd been doing this for years. "New player," she announced to the table, shuffling cards with practiced ease. The other players looked up briefly. A retired man in a cardigan who introduced himself as Chuck. A young couple celebrating their anniversary. A silent businessman in a rumpled suit who barely acknowledged my presence. Janet dealt the cards with a crisp snap. I looked at my hand. Ace of hearts, king of spades. "Blackjack. Winner," Janet said, pushing chips toward me. The feeling was immediate and electric. I'd just made $15 in 30 seconds, easier than an hour of construction work. The chips clinked together as I stacked them, a satisfying sound that seemed to promise more good things coming. "Beginner's luck," Chuck said with a grin. "Enjoy it while it lasts." But 3 hands later, I won again. Then again. In 30 minutes, I turned my $200 into $340. The cocktail waitress brought me a whiskey, free, she said, for players, and everything started to feel possible. The whiskey warmed my chest as I watched Janet shuffle the cards. Around the table, my fellow players had their own rhythms. Chuck tapped his fingers before every decision. The anniversary couple whispered to each other between hands. The businessman never changed expression, win or lose. I was up $140, and it felt like discovering a skill I'd always had but never knew about. The cards made sense. The math was simple. 21, or as close as possible without going over. "Hit me," I said, looking at 16 against Janet's 10. She flipped over a 5. 21, she announced, and pushed more chips my way. The stack in front of me grew taller. 200 became 300. 300 became 420. Each win felt like validation. Proof that this wasn't just luck, but something I could actually do well. "You're on fire tonight," Chuck said, cashing out his own chips. He was down to his last $20 and looked ready to call it quits. "Remember what I always say, quit while you're ahead." I nodded, but I wasn't ready to quit. The night was young, I was winning, and this was the most relaxed I'd felt in months. No crew to manage, no deadlines to meet, no 3 kids asking for attention. Just cards and chips and the pleasant buzz of whiskey. Chuck gathered his remaining chips and stood up. "Take it from an old-timer," he said, looking directly at me. "The house always wins in the end. Only question is whether you walk away with their money or they walk away with yours." He left a $20 tip for Janet and headed toward the exit. I watched him go. thinking he was probably just a cautious old man who didn't understand that sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead. The anniversary couple was whispering more urgently now. They'd lost most of their money and were down to arguing about whether to use the cash they'd brought for dinner tomorrow. Just one more hand, the husband said. His wife shook her head. We already spent more than we planned. They reminded me of Sarah and me discussing whether we could afford to replace the washing machine last month. Every financial decision weighed and measured, calculated against other needs. It felt good to be on the other side of that conversation for once. Janet dealt another round. I looked at my cards. Queen of diamonds, 6 of clubs. 16 against her king. Hit. I said .7 of hearts. 23. Bust. Sorry. Honey. Janet said, collecting my chips that it was the first hand I'd lost all night. And it stung more than I'd expected. $30 gone in one bad decision. But I still had almost $400 in chips, still well ahead of where I'd started. The next hand was better, 19 against her 18. Then another winner. The loss already felt like a distant memory by midnight. I'd been playing for 3 hours. The anniversary couple had left after losing their dinner money, replaced by 2 men in their 50s who seemed to know each other and kept ordering rounds of beer. The casino was louder now, weekend crowds filling the floor with energy and cigarette smoke. An MY chip stack had grown to nearly $500. I was up $300 from my original $200, enough to pay for the family's groceries for a month. Sarah would be amazed. Maybe I wouldn't even tell her how I'd won it. Just surprise her with extra money in the checking account. Then the cards turned cold. It happened fast, the way I'd heard it could, but never really believed. 3 hands in a row where I had good cards and Janet had better ones. My 500 became 420. Then 360. Then 280. The whiskey stopped tasting good and started tasting like medicine. My neck ached from sitting in the same position. The comfortable chair suddenly felt too small. Rough patch, Janet said sympathetically. Happens to everyone. But I could fix this. I still had $300 in my wallet, my safety net. Just enough to get back to even, maybe even ahead. The cards had to turn around eventually. That's how gambling worked, wasn't it? What goes down must come up. That I walked to the cashier's cage on unsteady legs, the casino floor spinning slightly around me. The same woman with silver hair exchanged my $300 for chips with the same kind smile. How's your luck holding up? She asked. Getting better, I said, though it wasn't true. Back at the table, Janet was dealing to 2 new players, a woman about Sarah's age and an old man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The businessman was still there, his expression unchanged, his chip stack about the same size as when I'd arrived. I bet $50 on the first hand. Lost. Bet 50 on the second. Lost again. The chips disappeared faster than I could count them. At by 1:30 in the morning, I had $20 left. $20 out of the $500 I'd brought, plus whatever remained of my safety net. The casino felt different now. Louder, more desperate, full of people like me who'd started the night with modest plans and reasonable limits. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Book club ran late. Hope you're sleeping well. Love you. I stared at the message, realizing I'd been gone for over 7 hours. She thought I was home, asleep in our bed, dreaming innocent dreams. Instead, I was sitting in a casino at nearly 2 in the morning, holding $20 and wondering how everything had gone wrong so fast. The ATM in the casino lobby glowed blue and white, promising more chances. The ATM screen glowed at me like a neon confession booth. My checking account balance, $2,847. Rent due Monday, car payment Wednesday, groceries needed tomorrow. But the machine also offered cash advances from my Visa. Limit, $1,000. I pressed the buttons like I was defusing a bomb. $300 slid out in crisp 20s, and I told myself this wasn't gambling money. This was recovery money. One good run, and I'd be even. Maybe ahead. Back at Janet's table, the late-night crowd had settled in. The woman Sarah's age was gone, replaced by a college kid who kept checking his phone. The old man who looked exhausted was still there, methodically feeding $20 bills into his losing streak. Welcome back, Janet said. Not unkindly. I bought chips with the 300, my hands steadier than they should have been. The first hand was a push, 17 against her 17. The second was a winner, 20 against her 19. For a moment, hope flickered back to life. Then I lost 6 hands in a row, The chips disappeared faster than before, like water down a drain. $50 bets became $100 bets as I tried to make up ground quickly. The math seemed simple. Bigger bets meant bigger wins when my luck turned around. But my luck didn't turn around. By 2:30 a.m., I was back at the ATM. Another $300. The machine dispensed it without judgment, just mechanical whirring and the soft thud of bills hitting the dispenser. The casino floor looked different in the deep night hours. Cleaning crews pushed vacuum cleaners between empty slot machines. The serious gamblers had settled into their rhythms, the ones who measured time in sessions, not hours. That I returned to a different table. New dealer, new players, same burgundy felt. Same cards that didn't care about my mortgage payment or my children sleeping at home. That my phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Sarah. The college kid next to me glanced over. Rough night. Getting better. I lied, but it wasn't getting better. Hand after hand, the cards fell wrong. My 300 became 200, then 100, then nothing. At 3:45 a.m., I stood in the casino lobby with empty pockets and a growing panic in my chest. I'd lost $1,100, money that wasn't really mine to lose, money that belonged to my family's future. The parking lot felt impossibly cold after the casino's warmth. I sat in my truck, hands shaking as I started the engine. Sarah's call showed on my phone screen like accusations that I needed a story, something believable, something that would explain why I'd been gone all night without mentioning cards or chips or the taste of failure in my mouth. Danny. My brother Danny was always having emergencies. Danny's pipe burst. I said into the phone, my voice steadier than it had any right to be. Flooded his basement. I've been helping him clean up. Sarah's voice was soft with sleep and concern. Oh no. Is everything okay? Why didn't you call earlier? I sat in the casino parking lot, engine running, practicing normal in real time. My phone died. We've been moving furniture and trying to save what we can. You know how Danny gets when he's stressed. It was perfect because it was plausible. Danny did get stressed during emergencies. I had helped him with household disasters before. The lie felt like putting on clothes that fit. Poor Danny. Do you want me to make something for him? A casserole or soup? He's got it covered. His neighbor brought food. I should be home in an hour or two. Drive safe. I love you. Love you too. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The same face that had kissed Sarah goodbye 12 hours ago, but something fundamental had shifted. I'd crossed a line I didn't know existed. Lying to my wife about money, about time, about where I'd been and what I'd done, but I didn't have a choice. The truth would hurt her more than the lie would protect her. Back inside, the casino felt like coming home to a place I'd never wanted to live. The same burgundy carpet, the same timeless lighting, the same promise that the next hand could fix everything. That I found a different blackjack table, reasoning that maybe my luck was tied to location. The dealer was a young man named Marcus who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. 2 older women sat at the far end, drinking coffee and playing with the methodical patience of people who'd been here all night. That I had $600 left in cash advance availability on my Visa. $600 to turn this disaster around. The math was simple. I needed to win $1,100 to get back to even. That was only 2 good hands at a $100 table. The first hand was blackjack. Natural 21, dealer showing 6. Winner, Marcus announced, pushing chips across the felt. For 30 seconds, everything felt possible again. I was down to needing 900 instead of 1,100. Progress. The second hand was 19 against his 20. Close, but not close enough that I looked at my chips, doing the math I'd been avoiding. It was 4:20 a.m. Sarah would wake up in 3 hours expecting me to help with Saturday morning breakfast and kids' soccer practice. I needed to be home, showered, and ready to pretend this night had never happened. But I also needed to win back the money I'd lost. Both things couldn't be true, but I kept playing anyway, hoping the cards would solve the problem for me. They didn't. By 5:30 a.m., I'd lost everything. The entire $1,100 sat somewhere in the casino's coffers while I stood in the parking lot watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and orange. The drive home took forever and no time at all. Suburban streets that had been empty when I left were now populated with early joggers and dog walkers. Normal people doing normal Saturday morning things while I tried to figure out how to explain missing money that wasn't missing yet. Our house looked smaller than I remembered, like I was seeing it through the wrong end of a telescope. The emergency fund envelope sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. But now it felt like evidence of someone I used to be. I showered off the casino smell, cigarettes and desperation, and the particular staleness of recycled air. In the mirror, I practiced expressions. Concerned about Danny. Tired from helping a brother in need. Satisfied with a job well done. "How's Danny?" Sarah asked when she came downstairs, already dressed and making coffee. "Better. Got most of the water cleaned up. He'll need new carpet in the basement, but insurance should cover it." She nodded, filling my travel mug without being asked. 12 years of marriage had created these small kindnesses, these automatic gestures of care. I felt like I was stealing them. "The kids want pancakes. Can you help with breakfast while I do laundry?" We fell into our normal Saturday routine. I mixed batter while Tommy and our daughters argued about cartoon channels. Sarah sorted clothes and started the washing machine. Everything exactly as it should be, except for the $1,100 that no longer existed at soccer practice. I stood on the sidelines with other parents, talking about work and weather and weekend plans. Chuck Henderson mentioned he was thinking about refinishing his deck. Linda Morrison complained about her teenager's attitude. Normal problems. Manageable problems that I made appropriate responses and laughed at appropriate times, but part of me remained in the casino, calculating what I should have done differently. If I'd quit when I was ahead. If I'd bet smaller amounts. If I'd chosen a different table. "You okay?" Sarah asked during the drive home. "You seem distracted." "Just tired. Long night at Danny's." But I wasn't tired. I was wired, running on adrenaline and the particular anxiety that comes from having done something irreversible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw cards falling in the wrong order. That evening, I wrote the rent check knowing our account couldn't cover it until Monday's paycheck cleared. I'd bought myself 3 days to figure out how to replace money that wasn't supposed to be gone. I told myself it was a one-time mistake. An expensive lesson learned. The problem was, I kept thinking about that moment when the dealer had shown blackjack and everything felt possible. The pure, electric thrill of easy money that I'd never felt anything quite like it before. Monday morning came too soon. I wrote the rent check with hands that barely shook, knowing it would clear by Wednesday if I was careful. The bigger problem was the emergency fund, $3,000 that had taken us 8 months to save, now reduced to $1,900 because of one night's bad decisions. The job site. I supervised my crew with the same attention to detail I'd always brought to work. Check the measurements twice. Follow the building codes. Stay on budget and on schedule. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You sure you're okay, boss?" Jimmy asked during lunch break. "You seem off." "Fine. Just tired." But I wasn't fine. Every time I drove past the Riverside Casino billboard, I slowed down without meaning to. Not because I wanted to go back. I didn't. But because my brain couldn't stop calculating what might have been different. 3 weeks passed. Normal weeks filled with work and family dinners and helping kids with homework. Sarah mentioned how good it felt to have money in checking again after I deposited my paychecks. She didn't know we were living closer to the edge than we had in years. That I researched blackjack strategy online during lunch breaks, reading about card counting and basic strategy charts. If I'd known these things 3 weeks ago, everything would have been different. The knowledge felt like armor I should have been wearing. When our water heater started making ominous noises, Sarah pulled out the emergency fund envelope without hesitation. "Thank God we have this," she said, counting out $200 for the repair. That I watched her count money I'd stolen from our future, and the guilt felt sharp enough to cut. But underneath the guilt was something else, a restless energy that made me want to fix everything quickly, dramatically, with one good night that would restore what I'd taken. "I need to work late tonight," I told her over dinner. "Johnson wants estimates for 3 new projects." It wasn't exactly a lie. Johnson did want estimates, but they weren't due until next week, and I could finish them in an hour. "Don't work too hard," Sarah said, kissing my cheek as I left. That I drove to the Riverside Casino with $100, money I'd saved by bringing lunch to work instead of buying it. Money that was supposed to buy groceries. This time would be different. I'd play smart. Small bets. Consistent strategy. In and out with a modest profit that would help restore our emergency fund without Sarah ever knowing it had been compromised. The casino looked exactly the same. Burgundy carpet, timeless lighting, the distant sound of slot machines promising fortune. I found a $10 blackjack table and played with the focused attention of someone taking a final exam. For 2 hours, it worked. My $100 became 140, then 180, then 220. I felt vindicated, like a student who'd studied harder for the retake and finally gotten the grade he deserved that I should have left then. I planned to leave then, but 220 could become 300 so easily. And 300 could restore a significant chunk of what I'd lost 3 weeks ago by 9 p.m. My careful strategy had crumbled into the same desperate betting that had cost me $1,100 the first time. The $100 was gone, along with another 100 I'd withdrawn from the ATM. Driving home, I realized I'd crossed a line I hadn't known existed. The first time had been a mistake. This time was a choice. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. The estimates took longer than expected, I told Sarah, handing her fake paperwork I'd created at the kitchen table. Line items for materials, labor costs, profit margins, all fictional, but detailed enough to look real. She glanced at the papers without much interest. You work too hard. Johnson's lucky to have you. I deposited my paycheck the next morning and transferred an extra $90 to our checking account, calling it overtime pay. Sarah was delighted by the unexpected money. Her smile felt like stealing. Over the next month, I returned to Riverside for more times. Always with small amounts, $50 here, $75 there. Money skimmed from lunch budgets and gas money and the small cash gifts my mother sent for the kids that I won twice and lost 3 times, but never catastrophically. The pattern felt sustainable, like a hobby that occasionally paid for itself. I was learning the rhythms of the game, the tells of different dealers, the optimal times to increase or decrease my bets. More importantly, I was proving to myself that the first night had been an anomaly. A beginner's mistake caused by inexperience and too much whiskey. This new approach was measured, scientific, controlled that I read gambling books and studied strategy charts. I learned about bankroll management and the importance of setting loss limits. If I'd known these things before, I never would have lost $1,100 in one night. The irony was that I was becoming genuinely good at blackjack. My win rate improved as I learned to recognize patterns and make mathematically optimal decisions. Some nights I came home with more money than I'd started with, but the wins created their own problem. Each successful session reinforced the belief that I could control the outcome through skill and discipline. Each loss felt like a temporary setback that could be corrected with better strategy and more careful play. Sarah noticed I seemed happier, more relaxed. "You've been in such a good mood lately," she said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "Work must be going well." It was going well. Johnson had given me 2 new projects, and my crew was performing better than ever. The gambling wasn't affecting my professional life. If anything, it was improving it. The mental challenge of blackjack kept my mind sharp, and the controlled risk-taking made normal work decisions feel easy by comparison. "Just feeling good about things," I said, which was mostly true that I was feeling good about things. The emergency fund was slowly being restored through my overtime pay deposits. The kids were doing well in school. Sarah seemed happy, and I'd found something that was just mine, a private challenge that tested my intelligence and rewarded careful thinking. The problem was that each session required slightly higher stakes to generate the same excitement. $50 sessions became $75 sessions. $10 bets became $15 bets. The math of what I needed to win kept shifting upward, but I was still in control, still setting limits and sticking to them, still coming home at reasonable hours with reasonable explanations for my whereabouts. Everything was manageable until the Christmas bonus check arrived. The Christmas bonus check was bigger than expected, $1,847, instead of the usual $1,200. Johnson's best year ever, he said, and he was sharing the wealth with his most reliable foreman. Sarah spread the check on our kitchen table like it was made of gold. "We could pay down the credit cards," she said, already calculating. "Maybe get the kids those bikes they've been wanting." But I saw something different in those numbers. Real money. Serious money. The kind of stake that could turn a modest gambling hobby into something more significant. "Let me deposit it first," I said. "Make sure it clears before we make plans." That evening, I told Sarah the bonus had been smaller than expected, only $1,200 instead of the $1,847 she'd seen. The bank had to correct their error, I explained, and Johnson felt bad about the confusion. She accepted the story without question. Why wouldn't she? In 12 years together, I'd never lied about money. Never lied about anything that mattered that I deposited the full amount, but but mentally set aside $647 for what I promised myself would be my last serious session at Riverside. This time, I'd play with real money at real stakes. Not the $10 and $15 tables I'd been practicing on, but the $25 and $50 tables where serious players made serious money. December 4th. I called in sick for the first time in 2 years. Johnson sounded concerned when I phoned in with a story about stomach flu. Take care of yourself, Bradford. Can't afford to lose you during busy season. His trust felt like a weight in my chest, but I pushed the feeling aside. One day wouldn't hurt anyone. One day to prove I could play at higher stakes and win the kind of money that would restore our emergency fund completely. The casino was different during daylight hours, quieter, more serious. The Christmas shoppers who wandered in from the adjacent mall played slots and small stakes table games. The real players, the ones who understood the mathematics of gambling, occupied the higher limit tables that I chose a $25 minimum blackjack table and bought in for $300. The dealer was a middle-aged woman named Patricia who handled cards with the precision of a surgeon. The other players nodded acknowledgement but didn't chat. This wasn't social gambling. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. My 300 became 450, then 600. The larger stakes made every decision feel more important, every win more significant. When I hit blackjack against Patricia's weak showing, the payout felt like vindication of everything I'd learned over the past month. But 600 could become 800 so easily, and 800 could become 1,000. And 1,000 could solve every financial worry we'd had all year that I moved to a $50 table. The logic seemed unassailable at the time. The $50 table was where serious money lived. 3 other players, all older than me, all with the calm expressions of people who measured success over hours, not hands. The dealer, a young man named Kevin, shuffled cards with casual expertise that I bought in for $400, keeping $200 as my emergency reserve. The mathematics were simple. At $50 per hand, I could weather normal swings while positioning myself for significant gains when the cards ran hot. For 30 minutes, it worked perfectly. My 400 became 600, then 750. The Christmas bonus money was growing like a plant in good soil. The man next to me, wearing an expensive watch and playing 500 per hand, glanced at my growing stack approvingly. Good run, he said quietly. I felt like I belonged at this table. The higher stakes demanded better strategy, more careful attention to card counts and betting patterns. It was gambling elevated to its proper level, a mental exercise for people smart enough to beat the system through skill and discipline. Then Kevin dealt me 16 against his 10 showing. Basic strategy said to hit. But 16 was close enough to feel safe, and Kevin's 10 could easily be paired with a 6 or 7 underneath. I stayed. Kevin flipped his whole card. 17 total. I lost $50. It was one hand. One mathematically correct decision that happened to go wrong. But it felt like a crack in the foundation of everything I'd built over the past month. The next hand was worse. 15 against his 9. I hit and drew a queen. Bust. Another $50 gone. My 750 became 650. Then 550. The other players maintained their calm expressions, but I could feel Kevin watching me with the professional concern of someone who'd seen this progression before. That I should have left then. Should have cashed out my remaining chips and driven home with a modest profit from the day. But I was down $100 from my peak, and that felt like leaving money on the table. That I broke into my $200 emergency reserve. The mathematics were still sound. Variance was temporary. Over enough hands, skill would prevail over luck. I just needed to be patient and trust the process. But patience became desperation somewhere around the 3rd consecutive loss. And desperation led to larger bets designed to recover ground more quickly. By late afternoon, I'd lost the entire Christmas bonus plus 2 credit card cash advances totaling $800. I sat at Kevin's table with empty pockets, and the growing realization that I'd destroyed more than money. I destroyed the fiction that I could control this. My phone showed 6 missed calls from Sarah and 1 text. Where are you? Kids asking about daddy. The casino around me suddenly looked different. Not timeless and elegant, but predatory and cold. The burgundy carpet was stained. The lighting was too bright. The sound of slot machines felt like mechanical laughter that I'd been playing for 8 hours straight. And I had nothing to show for it except a story I'd have to tell my wife about where I'd been and why our Christmas bonus had evaporated into thin AI or AI in the parking lot. Sitting in my truck, I practiced the words I'd need to say. Danny's truck had broken down. Tow truck delays. Mechanical problems that required unexpected expenses. Each lie felt heavier than the last. Danny's truck broke down on Highway 22. I told Sarah, my voice steady despite the lies pooling in my throat. Transmission went out completely. I spent all day dealing with tow trucks and mechanics. She wrapped her arms around me in the kitchen, and I felt like a fraud accepting her sympathy. Poor Danny. And poor you for helping him. Did you get anything to eat? Grabbed something at the garage. Another lie, easier than the first. How were the kids? Tommy kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I told him you were helping Uncle Danny. The guilt felt sharp and immediate. Tommy was 7, old enough to miss me, but too young to understand why I'd disappeared for an entire Saturday. I went upstairs and found him already asleep, one small hand clutching his favorite truck that I sat on his bed and watched him breathe. This was what I was risking. Not just money, but moments like this. Weekend mornings when he jumped on our bed. Soccer practices where he looked for me on the sidelines. The trust in his face when I promised him something. Downstairs, Sarah was creating next week's grocery list, the same Saturday evening routine we'd maintained for years. Chicken, milk, bread, cereal. Each item calculated against our budget. Each purchase weighed against other needs. The Christmas bonus will help, she said, adding frozen vegetables to the list. Maybe we can actually buy name-brand pasta this week. I made appropriate noises while internally calculating the disaster. The Christmas bonus was gone, all $18.47 of it, plus $800 in credit card advances I'd have to explain somehow. Our checking account balance was lower than it had been in months. Actually, I said, practicing the words I'd rehearsed in the truck, there was some confusion about the bonus amount. Johnson had to revise it downward, $1,200 instead of what we thought. Sarah's face fell slightly, but she adjusted the grocery list without complaint. That's still good money, she said. We'll make it work. Her resilience made everything worse. She trusted me to handle the finances, to make good decisions, to tell her the truth about our situation. Instead, I was leading her deeper into a hole she didn't know existed. Over the next 2 weeks, I created fake overtime hours to cover the credit card payments. 15 hours here, 20 there, always plausible amounts that justified extra money appearing in our account. Sarah never questioned the sudden increase in my work schedule, but the lies required maintenance. I had to remember which stories I'd told, which explanations I'd given for extra money or missing time. I started keeping mental notes, cross-referencing my fabrications to avoid contradictions. The worst part was how easily deception came to me. Each lie felt more natural than the last, like learning a language I'd always known but never spoken. I told myself I was protecting Sarah from worry, shielding our family from the consequences of my mistakes. But really, I was protecting myself from facing what I'd become. Christmas came and went with modest gifts and careful budgeting. The kids seemed happy enough with their presents, though I knew they'd noticed the difference from previous years. Fewer packages under the tree. More conversations about whether we could afford this or that on New Year's Eve. Sarah and I sat on our couch after putting the kids to bed, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about the year ahead. I have a good feeling about next year, she said, curled against my side. Things feel stable. Solid. I nodded and held her closer, knowing that everything she believed about our life was built on a foundation I'd been systematically destroying. The wine tasted like guilt, and her trust felt like a weight I wasn't strong enough to carry, but I also knew I couldn't stop. The gambling had become more than a hobby or even an addiction. It was the only way I could see to fix what I'd broken. One good night, one hot streak, one series of cards falling the right way, and I could restore everything I'd taken. The mathematics were simple. I just needed enough money to make it work. January brought new construction projects and a false sense of renewal. Johnson assigned me the biggest job of the winter, a medical office complex that would keep my crew busy for 3 months. The contract was worth more money than I'd ever managed, and Johnson's trust felt both reassuring and terrifying. "You're my most reliable foreman," he said, shaking my hand in his trailer office. "I sleep better knowing you're handling the important stuff." His confidence should have felt good. Instead, it felt like pressure. Every responsibility he gave me was another thing I could lose if my gambling got out of control. Another relationship that depended on me being the person I used to be. Sarah took over the family finances in mid-January, claiming I seemed too busy with work to track expenses properly. "You're working so much overtime," she said, organizing our bills into neat piles. "Let me handle the boring stuff so you can focus on earning." I wanted to protest, but couldn't without raising suspicions. Watching her manage our money was like watching someone perform surgery on a patient I'd already mortally wounded. She balanced checkbooks and paid bills with the careful attention of someone who believed our finances were fundamentally sound. The medical office project required frequent trips to supply stores and subcontractor meetings. I found myself taking lunch breaks near Riverside Casino, sometimes just sitting in the parking lot and watching people walk in and out. Winners and losers, though you couldn't tell which was which from their faces. That I hadn't been back since the Christmas bonus disaster, but the break wasn't voluntary. I simply didn't have access to enough cash to make gambling worthwhile. Sarah's takeover of our finances had effectively cut off my supply line. But desperation creates opportunity. When Danny called asking for help with his kitchen renovation, I saw a chance to rebuild my bankroll legitimately. He paid me $800 for 2 weekends of work, money Sarah knew about and approved of because it came with a paper trail. "You should do more side jobs," she said when I deposited Danny's check. "The extra money really helps." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was working harder than ever to fund an addiction that was destroying everything I worked for. But $800 felt like possibility, like a chance to win back some of what I'd lost and maybe, finally, get ahead of the disaster I'd created. On February 15th, I told Sarah I had estimates to finish for Johnson. The paperwork was real this time. I actually did need to calculate materials for the medical office project. But I also needed to test whether my 2-month break had changed anything fundamental about my relationship with gambling. The casino looked exactly the same. Burgundy carpet, timeless lighting, the familiar sound of possibility and disappointment mixing in recycled air. But I felt different walking through those doors. More experienced, more careful, less likely to make the same mistakes that had cost me the Christmas bonus. I chose a $15 table and bought in for $200, keeping the other $600 as my insurance policy. This time, I'd play with the discipline I'd learned through bitter experience. Small bets, conservative strategy, firm loss limits. For 3 hours, it worked perfectly. My $200 became $350, then $480. I felt vindicated, like a driver who'd learned from a previous accident and was now navigating the same dangerous road with appropriate caution. The dealer was Patricia, the middle-aged woman I remembered from my Christmas bonus session. She dealt cards with the same surgical precision, but this time I was ready for the variance. When I lost 3 hands in a row, I reduced my bet size instead of increasing it. When I won 4 straight, I banked half the profits instead of letting everything ride. By 9 p.m., I turned my $200 into $640. $440 profit, more than most people made in a week of regular work that I should have left then. The plan had been to leave then, but $440 could become $600 so easily, and $600 could become $800. And $800 could start to make a real dent in the hole I'd dug for my family. That I moved to a $25 table, telling myself I'd only play for 30 more minutes. That was my first mistake. The $25 table was busier than I expected for a Tuesday night. 2 men in business suits, a woman about my age who played with intense concentration, and an elderly man who seemed to be tracking every card that had been dealt. That I bought in for $400, keeping $240 as my safety net. The logic seemed sound. Higher stakes meant higher potential returns, and I'd proven over 3 hours that I could play disciplined, profitable blackjack. The dealer was someone new, a young woman named Michelle who looked barely old enough to drink, let alone supervise serious gambling. She dealt cards with nervous efficiency, clearly still learning the rhythms of the job.my first hand was blackjack. Natural 21, automatic winner. Michelle pushed $37.50 across the felt, and I felt that familiar surge of vindication. This was why I'd moved up in stakes. This was how real money was made. The elderly man nodded approvingly. "Nice start," he said quietly. For the next hour, the cards fell beautifully. Not every hand, but enough to keep me well ahead. My $400 became $650, then $820. The business suits cashed out after modest losses. replaced by a couple celebrating their anniversary with what was clearly a gambling budget they could afford to lose. That I watched them play conservative $15 hands and felt superior. They were treating gambling like entertainment, not recognizing the mathematical opportunity sitting right in front of them. With proper strategy and adequate bankroll, blackjack wasn't gambling. It was skilled play with positive expected value over time. By 10 p.m., I was up almost $700 from my original stake. The largest single session win I'd ever had, and achieved through patience and discipline rather than luck and desperation. But 700 could become 1,000 so easily, and 1,000 would represent a significant step toward undoing the damage from December. I increased my bet size to $50 per hand. The elderly man who'd been tracking cards gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Warning, maybe, or recognition of something he'd seen before. "Careful, son," he said as Michelle shuffled the deck. "The cards don't know how much you've won." I nodded politely but ignored his advice. I wasn't gambling recklessly. I was capitalizing on a hot streak with mathematically appropriate aggression. Every poker and blackjack book I'd read emphasized the importance of pressing advantages when the situation warranted it. The first $50 hand was a winner. 19 against Michelle's 18. The second was a push. 18 each. The third was where everything changed. I drew Queen 7 against Michelle's 6 showing. 17 was a strong hand against a weak dealer card. Basic strategy said to stand and let her draw to her potential bust, but I could see the next card in the deck. The way Michelle held the cards, the slight bend in the plastic, the positioning of her thumb, somehow I knew the next card was a 4, which would give me 21. I hit. The card was a 9. 26. Bust. Michelle collected my $50 bet with the same nervous efficiency she'd shown all night. But something had shifted in my perception of the game. For just a moment, I'd been certain I could see the future. Certain that skill and intuition could overcome probability. The certainty had been wrong. But the feeling lingered. I increased my bet to $75. The elderly man gathered his chips and stood up. "Good luck," he said. But his tone suggested he thought I'd need more than luck. As he walked away, I realized I was sweating despite the casino's climate control. My shirt stuck to my back, and my hands felt unsteady as I handled my chips. These were physical symptoms I'd never experienced during previous sessions, but I was still ahead, still playing with house money, still in control of the situation. Michelle dealt the next hand, and I lost again. Then again. My carefully built profit began to evaporate. $50 and $75 at a time. By midnight, my 820 had become 460. Still ahead, but the margin was shrinking fast enough to create a familiar desperation. Each lost hand felt personal, like the cards were deliberately working against me. Michelle shuffled with the same nervous efficiency, but now her competence felt threatening instead of reassuring. She was just doing her job, but her job was taking my money. The anniversary couple had been replaced by serious late-night players, a woman in her 50s who chain-smoked and played methodically, and a man about my age who looked like he'd been awake for too long. The table conversation died as the stakes increased and the losses mounted. I should have left when I was ahead. Should have walked away with my $600 profit and felt good about a successful evening. But should have was a luxury I couldn't afford when my family's financial stability hung in the balance. I broke into my safety net, the $240 I'd reserved for emergencies. At $75 per hand, it would buy me 3 chances to reverse the slide. First hand, 14 against Michelle's 10. I hit and drew a queen. Bust. Second hand, 15 against her 9. I stood and she drew to 20. Lost. Third hand, blackjack. Finally, a winner. Michelle paid me $112.50, and for a moment hope flickered back to life. But hope became greed somewhere in the next 30 minutes. $112.50 could become $200 so easily, and $200 could rebuild my cushion for a more conservative approach. I increased my bet to $100 per hand. The mathematics seemed reasonable. I was still playing with money I'd won earlier in the evening. Even if I lost the next few hands, I'd break even for the night. And breaking even was better than the disasters I'd experienced in previous sessions. The first $100 hand was a winner. 20 against her 19. The second was a push. The third was where Michelle dealt me 16 against her 10 showing. And I made the same mistake I'd made earlier. Convinced I could see what was coming next. I doubled down. $200 riding on one card. Point 7 of clubs. 23. Bust. Point $200 gone in 30 seconds. The woman who chain-smoked looked at me with professional sympathy. She'd seen this progression before. Conservative play deteriorating into desperate gambling as someone tried to recover losses that shouldn't have been losses at all. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Hope work is going well. Don't stay too late. I stared at the message, remembering that I was supposed to be at the office finishing estimates for Johnson's medical complex. Instead, I was sitting in a casino at 12:30 a.m., having just lost $200 in a single hand while my wife, worried about me working too hard. The disconnect between her perception and my reality felt like standing in two different universes. Simultaneously, I had $160 left in chips, enough for one more hand at $100 or several hands at smaller amounts. The smart play was to bet small and try to grind back slowly. The desperate play was to bet everything on one card and either solve the problem immediately or make it significantly worse. That I pushed all my chips forward. You sure? Michelle asked, her nervousness replaced by genuine concern. That I nodded, though I wasn't sure of anything anymore. She dealt me Jack 4 against her 8 showing. 14 total. One of the worst hands in blackjack. Basic strategy said to hit. But basic strategy had been failing me all night. That I stood. Michelle flipped her whole card. 5. 13 total. She had to hit. The next card came out in slow motion. King of Hearts. 23. Bust. I'd won. Michelle pushed 320 across the felt, and I felt like someone who'd jumped from a building and discovered he could fly. The rush was indescribable, pure relief mixed with vindication and the electric thrill of having risked everything and won. But 320 could become 500 so easily. That I played until 3 a.m., riding the emotional roller coaster between triumph and disaster. My 320 became 560, then dropped to 280, then climbed back to 440. Each swing felt like a complete life experience compressed into minutes. Michelle's shift ended at 2:30, replaced by a dealer named Carlos who looked like he'd seen every possible permutation of human hope and desperation. He dealt cards with mechanical precision, no nervous energy, no concern for winners or losers. Long night? He asked as I continued playing. Getting longer. I said by 3 a.m. I'd lost everything again. The entire $800 from Danny's renovation work, plus another $400 in credit card advances. $1,200 evaporated in one evening. Despite having been ahead by $700 at one point, the pattern was becoming familiar. Initial success followed by escalating stakes followed by total destruction. But knowing the pattern didn't seem to help me break it. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck and practiced the story I'd tell Sarah. Johnson had called with urgent changes to the medical office plans. Emergency revisions that required working through the night. I drove home through empty suburbs, past houses where normal people slept normal sleep after normal days. The contrast felt stark, their lives measured in alarm clocks and coffee makers. Mine measured in cards and cash advances and lies that got harder to track. Sarah was asleep when I got home, but she stirred as I slipped into bed. How did the estimates go? She asked sleepily. Complicated. Johnson wants changes to the whole project. She made a sympathetic noise and went back to sleep. I lay awake until dawn, calculating how long I could maintain this double life before something fundamental broke. The next morning brought a crisis. I should have anticipated, but somehow hadn't. Our credit card statement arrived with cash advances totaling nearly $3,000 over the past month. Advances Sarah didn't know about, from locations she wouldn't recognize. I intercepted the mail before she could see it, but intercepting mail was a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Eventually, she'd wonder why statements weren't arriving. Eventually, she'd call the credit card company to ask about missing bills that I had maybe a week before the financial deception became visible to someone who was paying attention. The job site. I supervised my crew with divided attention. Half my mind focused on construction schedules and building codes, the other half calculating how much money I'd need to replace what I'd stolen from our future. You okay, boss? Jimmy asked during lunch break. You seem distracted lately. Fine. Just a lot going on at home. But I wasn't fine. I was systematically destroying everything I'd spent 12 years building. My marriage, my family's security, my professional reputation, my sense of who I was as a man. And I couldn't seem to stop. That evening, Sarah mentioned that our credit card payment seemed higher than usual. Are you charging work expenses again? She asked. Remember to submit those receipts to Johnson for reimbursement. Already handled, I lied. Johnson pays slow, but he pays. She accepted the explanation, but I could see her mental wheels turning. Sarah was smart, detail-oriented, and increasingly responsible for managing money I was secretly stealing. Eventually, the numbers wouldn't add up. I needed one more session. One good night that would restore enough money to make the credit card balances look reasonable. I still had $800 available in cash advances across 2 cards. $800 to solve a $3,000 problem. The mathematics were impossible, but impossible had become my specialty. February 20th. I borrowed $800 from Danny for what I told him were truck repairs. He handed over the cash without question, the way brothers do when family needs help. Transmission problems again? He asked. Something like that. The lie came easily, but watching him count out 20s from his wallet made me feel like someone I didn't recognize. Danny worked construction too, saved his money carefully, and trusted family members to tell him the truth. I was violating every principle we'd been raised with, but I also knew this would be the last time. $800 was enough to play seriously at the $25 tables. With proper discipline and conservative strategy, I could turn it into enough money to at least make the credit card balances look explainable. The plan was simple. Play for 3 hours maximum. Bet no more than 25 per hand. Walk away with any profit over $300. I'd proven I could win when I played carefully. The key was leaving before greed overwhelmed discipline. Riverside Casino looked the same as always, but I felt different walking through those doors. More desperate, but also more focused. This wasn't entertainment or even addiction. This was surgery. Precise, necessary work to fix what I'd broken. I found Patricia dealing at a $25 table. She recognized me and nodded politely. 2 other players occupied the far seats, a middle-aged man who looked like an accountant and a woman in her 30s who played with professional intensity. Good to see you again, Patricia said as I bought chips. Good to be back. But it wasn't good to be back. It was necessary to be back, which felt entirely different. For the first hour, my conservative strategy worked perfectly. I bet 25 per hand, followed basic strategy religiously, and watched my 800 grow to 1160. The profit felt like vindication, proof that controlled gambling was just another form of skilled work. The accountant-looking man cashed out with a modest win. Smart to quit while you're ahead, he said, gathering his chips. I nodded agreement while privately thinking he lacked imagination. 1160 could become 1500 with patience and proper bet sizing, and 1500 would solve significant portions of my financial problems. But I maintained discipline. 25 per hand, basic strategy, no emotional decisions. By the second hour, I was up $400 and feeling genuinely confident about the evening's prospects. This was how gambling should work. Careful planning, conservative execution, modest but meaningful profits. Then Patricia dealt me a hand that changed everything. Ace-ace against her 6th showing. Splitting aces was mandatory strategy, but it required doubling my bet. $50 instead of 25. And if I caught good cards on the split, I might want to double down again. I looked at my chip stack. $1,200, representing every available dollar I could access without Sarah's knowledge. Split, Patricia asked. The correct play was obvious. The profitable play was obvious. But following correct strategy would mean betting more aggressively than I'd planned. I split the aces. First ace drew a 9. 20 total. Excellent hand. Second ace drew a 10. 21. Blackjack on a split ace. The best possible outcome. Patricia flipped her whole card. Queen. 16 total. She had to hit. Next card. 8. 24. Bust. I'd won both hands, plus the blackjack bonus on the second. Patricia pushed $112 across the felt, and I felt like someone who'd cracked a secret code. Suddenly, conservative $25 bets seemed timid. Why bet small when the cards were running this well? I increased my standard bet to $50. The transition from $25 to $50 bets felt natural, like shifting into a higher gear on a familiar road. My bankroll could handle the increased variance, and the potential returns were significantly better. For 30 minutes, the higher stakes seemed brilliant. My 1200 became 1640, then 1890. Patricia dealt cards with the same professional efficiency, but now each hand carried enough weight to matter. $50 wins felt meaningful. $50 losses motivated better concentration. The woman who played with professional intensity watched my progression with neutral interest. She'd been betting hundreds per hand since I'd arrived, treating my 50s like I'd been treating 25s an hour earlier. Running. Good tonight, she commented as I won 3 consecutive hands. Feels that way. But feeling good and being good were different things. And the cards didn't care about my financial situation or my growing confidence in my ability to read the game at 9:30 p.m. Patricia dealt me 12 against her 10 showing. Basic strategy said to hit, but 12 was close enough to make standing feel reasonable. And I'd been reading the deck well all evening that I stood. Patricia flipped a 6. 16 total. She had to hit. Next card, 5. 21 that I'd lost by making the wrong decision based on intuition rather than mathematics. $50 gone because I'd started believing I was smarter than basic strategy. The loss stung more than it should have. Probably because it represented a fundamental error in thinking rather than simple bad luck. I'd abandoned the discipline that had made the evening successful in favor of hunches that had no basis in reality. But I was still ahead $800. Still playing with house money. Still in control of the situation that I increased my bet to $75 to accelerate the recovery. This was where the evening began to unravel, though I couldn't see the pattern yet. Each loss felt like a temporary setback that could be corrected with slightly more aggressive play. Each win felt like validation that I was reading the game correctly. My 1890 became 1520, then 1260. Still ahead. But the margin was shrinking fast enough to create the familiar sense of urgency. Patricia's shift ended at 10 p.m. Replaced by Kevin, the young dealer I remembered from my Christmas bonus disaster. He recognized me and nodded politely. Back for more, he asked as he settled into his chair. Trying to finish what I started. But what I'd started was unclear. Was I trying to win back money I'd lost in previous sessions? Win enough to pay down credit cards? Win enough to restore the emergency fund? The goals kept shifting as the results changed. Kevin dealt cards with casual competence, no nervousness, no obvious tells or patterns. The woman who'd been betting hundreds per hand cashed out with what looked like a modest loss. Good luck, she said, gathering her purse. Now it was just me and Kevin and the accountant-looking man, who'd returned for a second session after dinner. The table felt more intimate, more focused. Every decision carried weight. I lost 3 hands in a row and found myself down to $800, exactly, where I'd started the evening, breaking. Even felt like losing after being ahead almost 1,000. I'd spent 3 hours playing disciplined blackjack, made mostly correct decisions, and had nothing to show for it except the knowledge that I was running out of time to solve my credit card problem. That I increased my bet to $100 per hand. The mathematics seemed sound. I needed to win back $400 to restore my earlier profit. At 100 per hand, that was only 4 wins more than losses. Entirely achievable with basic strategy and ordinary variance. Kevin dealt me Jack 6 against his 9 showing. 16 total. The worst hand in blackjack. Basic strategy said to hit, but 16 felt close enough to be safe. And hitting 16 had been costing me money all evening that I stood. Kevin flipped a 5. 14 total. He had to hit. Next card, 7. 21. Another $100 gone to a decision based on emotion rather than mathematics. But I still had 700. Still enough for 7 more chances to get this right. That I pushed another 100 forward. By 1 a.m. I'd lost everything. Not just Danny's 800, but another 1,200 in credit card advances that would show up on statements I couldn't intercept forever. $2,000 total, gone in 5 hours of playing what I'd convinced myself was careful, strategic blackjack. Kevin dealt cards with the same casual competence he'd shown all evening. If he felt bad about taking my money, he didn't show it. Why should he? I'd made every decision voluntarily. No one had forced me to ignore basic strategy or increase my bet sizes when losing. Rough night, he said as I signed the credit slip for my final cash advance. They happen, but rough nights weren't supposed to happen. When you played with discipline and proper bankroll management. Rough nights were what happened to degenerate gamblers who chased losses with money they couldn't afford to lose, which, apparently, was what I'd become without noticing the transition. In the parking lot. I sat in my truck and added up the damage. Since that first Friday night in October, I'd lost over $26,000. Money that had come from our emergency fund, credit card advances, Danny's loan, and the Christmas bonus Sarah thought had been smaller than it actually was. $26,000. That might as well have been thrown into a fire for all the value it had provided. But the money was just the beginning of what I'd lost. Trust, integrity, peace of mind, the ability to look at myself in mirrors without seeing a stranger, all gone. Sacrificed to the belief that the next hand would fix everything. That I drove home through empty streets, practicing the story I'd tell Sarah about working late on Johnson's project. The lies were getting more elaborate, requiring more supporting details and careful continuity. Soon I'd need lies to cover the lies, a whole fictional infrastructure to support the illusion that I was still the man she'd married. Sarah was asleep when I got home, but she stirred as I slipped into bed. "How's the project going?" she asked sleepily. "Almost finished. Few more late nights should wrap it up." She made a sympathetic noise and went back to sleep. I lay awake calculating how many days I had before credit card statements arrived that I couldn't explain away. The next morning brought the crisis I'd been dreading. Sarah was sorting mail when I came downstairs, and she held up a credit card statement with a confused expression. "This can't be right," she said. "It shows $3,200 in cash advances from last month. Did you use this card for work expenses?" I looked at the statement. Itemized transactions from ATMs at Riverside Casino. Amounts and times that told the whole story of my double life. "There must be an error," I said. Though we both knew there wasn't, Sarah spread the statement on our kitchen table like evidence in a trial. Her face changed as she read each transaction, understanding dawning in real time. "Riverside Gaming," she read aloud. "What's Riverside Gaming?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I'd been setting for months. In our kitchen, with our children eating breakfast upstairs and our normal life continuing around us, the lies finally caught up to me. That I could have tried one more deception. Could have claimed the charges were fraudulent or work-related or somehow not what they appeared to be. But looking at Sarah's face, seeing the trust drain out of her eyes as she understood what Riverside Gaming was, I finally ran out of stories to tell. "It's the casino," I said. "I've been gambling." She stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Gambling? You? How much gambling?" That was the question I'd been avoiding, even in my own mind. How much? How much money? How much time? How much damage to everything we'd built together? "I don't know exactly," I said, which was true. "More than we can afford." She did the math while I watched, calculating what $3,200 in cash advances meant for our budget, our bills, our children's future. The silence stretched between us like a canyon I'd been digging for months. "Is this why we've been struggling?" she asked finally. "Why money's been tight? Why you've been working so much overtime?" I nodded, unable to speak. She moved her wedding ring from her left hand to her right, then back again, a gesture that broke my heart more than any words could have. "Who are you?" she whispered. It was the question I'd been asking myself for months, sitting in casino parking lots at sunrise, driving home from disasters I'd created with money we didn't have. Who was I? I'd been Oliver Bradford, construction foreman, reliable husband, father of three. Now, I didn't know. 8 months later, I sit in a church basement every Tuesday night, telling my story to strangers who understand exactly how reasonable $500 can sound when you're tired and stressed and looking for something that feels like control. Sarah and I are in counseling, trying to rebuild trust from the wreckage of what I destroyed. The kids know something changed between mommy and daddy, though they don't know why. We're paying down the debt slowly, $43,847 that documents every bad decision I made between October and February. Sometimes I drive past Riverside Casino on my way to job sites, and I remember exactly how those chips felt in my hands, how the cards looked falling across green felt, how the lights painted everything in colors that don't exist in the real world. But mostly I think about Sarah's face that morning, holding those credit card statements like evidence of a crime she couldn't quite believe I'd committed. The way she looked at me like I was a stranger wearing her husband's face. That's the image that keeps me driving past the casino instead of stopping. Not the fear of losing more money, but the memory of losing something more valuable than money. The trust of the person who loved me enough to believe I was better than I turned out to be.